On a freezing winter afternoon, when most people hurried past with their collars turned up and hearts shut tight, a kind-hearted waitress named Mira stepped out of the cafe where she worked and noticed a little boy sitting alone on the pavement. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and his tiny fingers were red from the cold. Most passers-by didn't even glance his way, but Mira couldn't ignore him. Something in his eyes, loneliness, maybe fear, made her pause. She knelt down beside him. "Are you hungry?" she asked gently. The boy didn't say a word, just nodded with wide, tired eyes. He looked no older than 7, yet his expression held the silence of someone who had seen too much, too young. Mira felt her chest tighten. She didn't have much herself. Her pockets were nearly always empty before the month ended, but that day, without hesitation, she brought the boy inside the cafe, sat him at a warm corner table, and served him a full plate of hot food. As the boy ate, still too quiet, Mira asked for his name. "Raju," he whispered. No surname, no parents mentioned, just Raju. After her shift, while the other staff laughed and planned their evening, Mira did something she'd never done before. She took out the last of her salary, money she'd saved for her own needs, and went to the nearby market. She bought a soft wool sweater, pants, socks, and even a tiny beanie. Not expensive clothes, just clean and warm. When she returned and handed the bundle to Raju, the boy's lips trembled. He didn't cry. He just looked at her with a stunned kind of gratitude, as if no one had ever done something like this for him. What Mira didn't know, what no one knew, was that this little beggar wasn't just a lost child on the street. He was the missing son of one of the city's most powerful and elusive billionaires, Mr. Veer Kapoor. Veer Kapoor wasn't the kind of man who showed up in public or gave interviews. He stayed behind the scenes, running one of the biggest corporate empires in the country, but a shadow hung over his success. His young son had disappeared 2 years ago. During a family trip, police had searched, rewards were offered, but no trace was ever found. Rumors swirled. Kidnapping, betrayal, even murder. And yet somehow, Raju had ended up begging on the streets, and no one recognized him. Mira didn't know any of that. All she saw was a child in need. She let him stay with her in her tiny rented room above the cafe, fed him what little she could, and gave him back a sense of comfort, one day at a time. She even taught him how to read small words from leftover newspapers. Raju clung to her like she was the only safe thing in the world. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, something began to change. Not just in Raju, but in Mira too. She, who had always lived quietly, who had no family of her own, started smiling more, singing under her breath while folding laundry. There was a warmth in her life. Again, something more than just survival. But fate doesn't stay quiet for long. One evening, a sleek black car stopped in front of the cafe. Out stepped a tall man in a tailored suit, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. He looked out of place, too polished, too powerful for the small, bustling neighborhood. His name was Arjun, and he was Veer Kapoor's most trusted aide, known for being cold, efficient, and loyal. For the past few weeks, he had been following a quiet lead, a blurry CCTV footage from a far-off gas station that showed a child resembling Raju. That lead brought him here, as Mira came out of the cafe with Raju's hand tucked in hers. Arjun's eyes locked on the boy, and for a moment he froze. The child he had spent years searching for was right in front of him, holding the hand of a waitress in second-hand jeans and a coffee-stained apron. Mira saw the man staring and instinctively pulled Raju closer. "Can I help you?" she asked. Arjun, didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, his gaze flickering between Mira and Raju. "Where did you find this child?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Raju clung to Mira, eyes wide, frightened. "He's been with me for weeks," Mira said, unsure of what was happening. "Why?" That's when everything began to unravel. Arjun made a call. A helicopter arrived. The next morning, men in black suits flooded the area. And just like that, Mira's quiet life turned into a whirlwind. Reporters, questions, and a strange emptiness surrounded her. After Raju was taken away for a DNA test, the child who had laughed with her, shared meals, slept curled beside her old heater, was gone. But something even stranger happened a few days later. Instead of a thank you note or a reward check, Mira received a personal visit from Mr. Veer Kapoor himself. He was not what she expected, not cold, not arrogant, just exhausted. He stood in her little kitchen, holding a steaming cup of tea she offered, and said just one sentence that changed everything. "You saved my son's life, and I need you to stay in his." Before Mira could even process what he meant, someone else walked into the room. Raju, now freshly dressed, looking healthier, but still holding Mira's old scarf in his hand. He ran to her and hugged her tightly, and standing behind him was another man, a young businessman, about Mira's age, dressed in a navy coat, watching her with a quiet intensity. His name was Kabir Kapoor, Veer's nephew and heir to part of the empire. He had watched Mira on the security footage, the way she had cared for Raju like her own child, and something in her kindness had moved him deeply. As Mira stood in the middle of that luxurious apartment, far from her simple cafe life, with strangers offering her gratitude, wealth, and responsibility she never asked for, she realized her life would never be the same. But what she didn't realize was that love had already found a way in, and it all began with a sweater, bought for a little beggar on a cold winter day. But that was only the beginning, because Mira was about to find herself caught between loyalty and love, between the life she knew and the life she never imagined, and between a child's innocent heart and a powerful family's secrets. What happens when kindness meets destiny? Mira never imagined her small act of kindness would bring her into a world filled with chandeliers, luxury cars, and high-security gates. She still remembered the warmth of her tiny room above the cafe, the smell of fried snacks downstairs, the creak of the wooden stairs, the way Raju would wrap his arms around her waist while she stirred tea. Now, she stood in a mansion where even silence echoed, dressed in borrowed designer clothes that didn't feel like hers, surrounded by people whose lives were stitched with power, expectations, and secrets. Kabir Kapoor watched her closely, always. Polite but distant. He was smart, successful, and carried himself like someone who had grown up knowing he belonged in a room full of CEOs. Yet something about Mira, her simplicity, her fearlessness when it came to protecting Raju, intrigued him. He often found himself walking into rooms just to see if she was there. Raju, now called Arav again, had slowly adjusted to the new world. His laughter had returned, and so had his appetite. But even when dressed in the finest clothes, he still looked for Mira first thing in the morning. He refused to sleep without her bedtime stories, the ones she made up about talking crows and kind monsters. The staff whispered, some with admiration, others with suspicion. After all, who was this unknown waitress who now lived under the same roof as the billionaire's only heir? Veer Kapoor remained reserved, grateful, but cautious. He had been through too much. False leads, betrayal from those closest to him, While he appreciated Mira's role in Arev's return, he wasn't ready to trust easily. One evening, as they sat in his study, he said quietly, "People disappear in this world all the time. Sometimes they come back changed. Sometimes they don't come back at all." Mira didn't reply. She just looked at him, understanding more than he expected. Soon, the truth about Arev's disappearance came out in pieces, through documents, private investigations, and whispered conversations. Behind closed doors, Arev hadn't wandered off or been kidnapped by strangers. Someone inside the Kapoor household had planned his disappearance, hoping to destroy Veer emotionally and force him into early retirement. The person behind it, Veer's own cousin, Ramesh Kapoor, once part of the family business, now living abroad. The betrayal ran deep. Veer had always believed business stayed in boardrooms, not in blood. But Ramesh had envied his power. And when he couldn't take the empire by force, he tried to break the man holding it. The plan had failed, but at a cruel cost. 2 years of Arev's life lost, and Mira caught in the middle of a storm she never saw coming. The tension thickened when Ramesh suddenly returned to the city, pretending he had no knowledge of the past events. He smiled too much, shook hands too easily, and kept his real motives hidden. Veer didn't trust him, but the board wanted peace. Investors wanted calm, and Arev, sensing the shift in energy, grew quiet again. Meanwhile, something unspoken began to grow between Mira and Kabir. They found themselves talking late into the night in the garden, and Kabir opened up about his childhood, how his mother had died early, how he had grown up trying to meet impossible expectations. Mira, in turn, spoke about her life before the cafe, how she had been raised by her grandmother in a small town, how she came to the city, chasing a dream that faded when her grandmother passed. One night, as rain fell lightly outside, Kabir said, "You know, I always thought love was for people who had time for it. I never did. Until now." Mira looked at him, unsure whether he was talking about her or the moment. Maybe both. She didn't reply, but her heart did. Still, not everything was soft glances and quiet garden walks. One evening, Arev disappeared again. The entire house plunged into panic. Mira's voice cracked as she screamed his name, running through corridors. Kabir got security involved instantly. Veer stood frozen at first, then barked orders. His calm shattered. Hours passed. Then a call came, a disguised voice on the other end. "If you want the boy back," the man said coldly, "step down, sign everything over." It was Ramesh. This time, he wasn't bluffing. Kabir wanted to alert the police, but Veer stopped him. "This is my mistake. My son is paying for my sins." He looked at Mira, eyes heavy. "Can you help us find him again?" Mira didn't hesitate. Her instincts, built from years of living in the shadows of society, kicked in. She remembered how Arav always mentioned an old park he liked near the cafe, where the swings squeaked and the dogs were friendly. It wasn't far from a closed warehouse area, abandoned, forgotten. She insisted they check. What they found chilled her. Arav was there, scared but unharmed, sitting in a corner of a dusty room. The man with him ran as soon as he saw headlights, but not before Mira caught a glimpse of his face. It wasn't Ramesh. It was someone else, someone she had seen in the Kapoor mansion, someone close. The betrayal was deeper than anyone had thought. As Kabir pulled Arav into his arms, holding him tight, Mira stood in silence, shaken. The enemy wasn't just Ramesh. The real threat had been standing next to them all along, and just as they thought it was over, a new piece of truth surfaced. A letter, hidden in Veer's old office drawer, addressed to Kabir, from someone no one knew existed. And what it said would change everything. Kabir stared at the letter in his hands. The paper slightly yellowed at the edges, as if it had been waiting to be found for years. His name was written in a careful, almost hesitant hand. Mira stood quietly beside him, sensing that whatever was inside would not just affect Kabir, but everyone connected to the Kapoor family. He opened it slowly, heart racing. Inside was a short note, but every word hit like a storm. Kabir, if you're reading this, it means the truth has finally found its way to you. I am your mother, not the woman you were raised to believe, but the one who was forced to leave. Veer Kapoor and I were in love once, but I didn't belong in his world. When his family found out I was pregnant, they made sure I disappeared. He never knew. They raised you in silence, as someone else's child, while I watched from afar. Kabir sat down heavily, the letter trembling in his hands. His mind raced. Everything he thought he knew, his childhood, his place in the Kapoor family, had just turned into something else entirely. Veer was his real father. Arav wasn't just his cousin, he was his brother. Mira knelt beside him. You okay? She whispered gently. He looked at her, lost. I don't even know who I am anymore. Mira reached out and took his hand. You're still the man who helped me when no one else did. The one Raju trusts. That hasn't changed. For a moment, he just breathed, trying to hold on to something real, and in that silence, something shifted. The confusion gave way to clarity. Kabir stood up, his eyes sharp now. Ramesh knew. That's why he was so desperate to keep control. If people found out I was Veer's real son, his chances of taking over the business would vanish. Back at the mansion, Veer sat stunned when Kabir placed the letter before him. For a long while, he said nothing. Then, his hands shaking, he whispered, She was the only woman I ever truly loved. I searched for her. They told me she died. Tears welled in his eyes, not from weakness, but from years of buried truth. And all this time, my son was right in front of me. Ramesh didn't stand a chance now. The moment Kabir publicly acknowledged the letter, and Veer confirmed it with old DNA records, quietly buried by the family, the board turned against Ramesh. His final move, to kidnap Arav, was the last straw. He was arrested, not just for the abduction, but for years of financial misdeeds Veer had finally chosen to expose. With the truth out, things began to change. Arav slowly returned to his playful self. He now had two parents, Veer and Mira, who never left his side. Though Mira wasn't his biological mother, he still clung to her like she was his whole world. And for Mira, who had spent most of her life unnoticed, unloved, and underestimated, his love was everything. Kabir took time to process it all. Some days he was quiet. Others, he would laugh with Mira like nothing had changed. But deep down, he knew who he was now. He was not just a Kapoor by name. He was part of its heart, and maybe, for the first time, he was ready to live for himself. One soft spring morning, as Mira helped Arav into his school uniform, Kabir walked into the kitchen with something behind his back. Arav grinned. Uncle Kabir, what's that? Kabir winked. Nothing you need to worry about, little man. Then he turned to Mira and brought out a small box. Her breath caught. She wasn't one for fairy tales or grand gestures. But this felt different, real, honest. I don't care about the last name or what the world thinks, Kabir said quietly. I care about you. You're the reason this family is whole again. Will you stay? Not as a guest, not as a helper, but with me. Tears sprang to Mira's eyes. Only if you'll help me make breakfast every day. She smiled through them. They didn't need grand weddings or cameras. Their love story had already been written in small kindnesses, stolen glances, and shared responsibilities. The cafe Mira once worked in, she reopened it with Kabir's help, this time as a co-owner. They hired single mothers, struggling students, and gave free meals to street children every Sunday in Raju's name. As for Veer, he stepped back from the business, choosing to spend quiet afternoons in the garden with his sons. Sometimes he would just watch them, Kabir and Arav playing with toy planes on the lawn, and whisper to himself, "I got a second chance." The story of the kind waitress who spent her last savings on a beggar child had become something more. It wasn't just about love of family. It was about how one small act of goodness could unravel lies, rebuild broken bonds, and light a path forward. And even now, people at the cafe still talk about it. About the girl in the faded apron who gave away her money and found a whole new life. Sometimes, the richest hearts come from the simplest places. And sometimes, love truly does begin with kindness.